All right. And Audacity in 3, 2, 1. All right. Welcome back to the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast. And today we have another very special guest attending with us here. We have Brad Dieter on the podcast, the COO of Macros Inc. Is that correct?
That is currently my title, yes.
Awesome. Well, welcome. And we're excited to have you.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. It's fun to be here, and I'll start the show by giving you guys a compliment. Your follow up on stuff is awesome. So, big kudos to you guys for being super organized. And I think this was the easiest scheduling of a podcast I've had in a long time. So, kudos to you guys.
Wow. All right. I'm going to pat myself on the back and pat
Yeah,
ourselves on the
you
back
should.
here. I don't
You
know.
should.
That's just like normal process for us. So I'm sorry that you've had other experiences lately.
No, you guys are doing a good job. So keep doing what you're doing.
Sweet. Well, awesome. Well, we're super excited to just kind of pick your brain on a ton of different things today. And I have kind of a couple questions that are more targeted, but I'm very interested to see just where it goes and where you take us. But I would love to just kind of get a little bit more background on you for the audience, because like you said, you have been doing this since I was basically 12 years old. So
Yeah.
tell us kind of how you got your roots in the fitness industry and coaching, and then just how that evolved, if you want to give us the elevator pitch of that.
Yeah. So I grew up, I was an athlete kind of my whole life. Realized probably professional athletics and the sport that I chose, which is basketball, was just not in the cards. You know, being 6 foot and white, I kind of realized probably at 18, like I was probably better off making money with my brain than my vertical leap. So decided when I went to college, I wanted to go to med school. That ended up, after being in school for about 4 years, just decided, clinical medicine wasn't really what I wanted to do, but really still wanted to do something in kind of the healthcare field. So took a year off, just kind of did the adult thing, took a job, moved to a big city, worked there for a while, and then decided I wanted to go back to school. So I went and did my master's and my doctorate in basically, we looked at exercise and nutrition as ways to develop better therapeutics. So we kind of took the exercise and nutrition as medicine thing to like as far of an extreme as you could. So we actually use it to try to find like new drugs. And so I actually did a bunch of work there, did my postdoc in kind of a very similar field, mostly on kind of protein metabolism and chronic disease. And then along the way, I basically paid my way through graduate school by doing personal training and nutrition coaching. And this was back in 2011. So I was kind of probably one of the first dozen, maybe 100 of coaches in the US doing online coaching. So this was way back in the Wild West where Facebook ads were just a brand new thing. The first like ebook ever came out in the space. So this was kind of when I was there. So I basically paid my way through grad school doing that. And during my postdoc, realized like going into academic medicine, being a professor just was not what I wanted to do. So kind of took my small business that I started in grad school, worked with a colleague of mine and built the company called Eat to Perform. So that was basically from 2015 to 2018. So we grew that to a little over, I think we had about 3,500 active clients. And then I kind of sold my portion of that to go do something else for a while, and then kind of jumped back into the coaching game and joined up with Macros Inc. when they were still really small. I think they had maybe 150, 200 clients when I joined, and kind of helped scale that business up to, right now we're just a little under about 7,000 active clients. We've got about 120 coaches. So yeah. And then along the way, I've done a ton of writing, a ton of speaking, sit on some advisory boards. So I've just been very fortunate with kind of the way the chips have fallen in my career and been able to do a lot of cool things.
Yeah, that's awesome. Wow. So yeah, you've clearly worked with a lot of clients over the years. Do you currently still coach any clients today, or is that off your plate?
I do not coach any clients currently, which is kind of crazy. So I do work with, technically, I guess they're clients. I do a lot of kind of nutrition work for collegiate and professional teams. So currently I work with the Gonzaga men's basketball team. I do all their kind of nutrition program over there. So technically that's all in-person stuff, but I don't do any online coaching anymore.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I mean, that definitely is just like looking at it at scale. Like I know that my company is like just under 100 clients or something like that. And I'm like, dang, we're so big. And it's just like a moment to look at that and be like, all right, like this is definitely like more is possible in the fitness industry with that. But having worked with so many clients, I have a couple, I guess, directions that we could take this, but specifically like when it comes to just coaching people in general, like what have you found that you became the most passionate about over the course of your career?
Yeah, what's really interesting about coaching in, if you guys are at 100 clients now, that means you've probably worked with a couple hundred in your career, is you've probably already noticed the things that you focus on change a lot, right? Like every cohort of clients you get in, you start to learn what really matters, what doesn't matter. And so I think the big shifts in my coaching throughout my career were when I first started, I was all about as much information about like the details of training and nutrition as I could get. And then how could I give that to my clients, right? Is how could I have the perfect program designed for them? How could I give them every piece of information they could ever know? And as my, career really progressed towards the end of it, it was what is the least amount of information I can give my clients? And like, what is the one thing that they need to know for the next 6 months? And if we do that, that's it. Right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of this process of like, how do you strip everything out and focus on the one thing that matters? And I think that's one of those things where it's all about experience, right? Once you've seen 100 clients, 1,000 clients, 10,000 clients, you really start to realize what are the things in people's lives that actually matter? What do they need to focus on? And what do I know is going to move the needle and what can I give them and kind of keep redirecting their focus?
Yeah. Absolutely. It's just so funny that you say that because it's always like we come in with the Dunning-Kruger effect of like, I know everything
Yeah.
and you need to know everything. And then it gets simpler and simpler. And you're like, actually, I just need you to understand that protein is important and that you should probably move more often.
Yeah. And at some point, I'm sure you're just like, what are they even paying me for? Right. Like if you don't get to that point at some point, you're like, okay, I haven't made it simple enough, right? Because you just have to think, you have to communicate to them in like the most basic level of that's possible to really just get them to understand what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And just kind of out of curiosity, so something that's been like just really a point of interest for me lately is specifically kind of distinctions between clients that have like say less than 50 pounds to lose, like, and it's more so it is for health, but it's also for like body composition, maybe more advanced body composition goals, and clients who have 100, 150, 200 pounds to lose. The distinctions between working with those types of people and what those types of people are up against, just kind of the contrast between that. So I'm kind of curious, just because you have such a broad like experience working with so many people, have you noticed trends between those two demographics?
There's a lot of differences, and I think it's easier to probably talk about the 100+ pound weight loss group first because there's a very distinct process that most of them go through. One is communicating to them just the timeline of what it's going to take, right? 100+ pounds can be lost in a year, but for most people, it's going to be
Yeah.
18 months, 2 years, 3 years, right? And so I think getting them to understand that is way more important, right? Most people can lose 40 to 50 pounds in 9 to 12 months if they're like super focused, right? It doesn't matter how focused you are, more than 100 pounds in that time frame just is not feasible, and it's really not the right way to do it. So I'd say that's the first thing, is just getting them engaged in the long process, right? The second
Yeah.
piece is you kind of end up in very specific situations with those clients where the initial phases easy, right? They lose a lot of weight. You make very small changes. I mean, if those people start walking a little bit and they change one thing about what they do, like they cut out the 72-ounce soda from 7-Eleven every day, it's like they're losing 3, 4 pounds a week for the first 4 to 6 months. And then things get slow, right? And then they start to think something's wrong with them and the process is broken. And you get this kind of month 6 to month 9 where it's like, this is where things start to get difficult. And you kind of
Yeah.
have to guide them through that period. And you kind of have to prepare them like, hey, this is coming, right? These are the conversations that we're going to be having 3 months from now. So just kind of prepare for it, right? So when it happens and you get on the scale and you're only down half a pound instead of 4 pounds this week, you don't feel like the process is over, right? You kind of know what's coming. So those are two of the big things. Another one is it can be really hard to understand what their life looks like on a daily basis if you've never been there, right? And so I
Yeah.
think that was especially early in my career when I had a couple clients who, weighed 400, 500 pounds, and just understanding, when they say like, dude, I couldn't go walk half a mile. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, why can't you go walk half a mile? And so you kind of have to get the experiential knowledge of what can we do? What are the changes we can make? And how does this actually affect my lifestyle? Those are big things that we don't really think about when we work with clients like that. Is those initial phases, there are some restrictions. And then the last piece, I would say the identity that those people tend to carry with them is the hardest part to change. And a lot of times that's outside our scope of practice, and we kind of have to bring in other people to help us with that. Is if they can find help along that journey of really letting go of that identity of who they were 6 months ago, a year ago, 18 months ago, that's really helpful. And it's really interesting. It varies client to client. Some people are, I want to get rid of that identity. How do I get rid of it? And some people are, no, that's who I am. I want to go back to that identity, right? And they kind of have to sort through that as they're going through that process. So I'd say those are some of the big differences between kind of the 20, 30, 40 pound weight loss people and the 100 plus pound weight loss people.
Yeah.
I think some of the bigger differences with the other group are when you've got 20 pounds to lose, how much motivation is there at times for you to actually make a change, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes that catalyst to get over the hump and like actually see a big change, you're not that motivated by it, right? You haven't really hit rock bottom yet, right? It's why a lot of people end up going from 25 pounds overweight to 15 pounds overweight back to 25 to 15. Like it's that cycle, because it's never really bad enough to completely change your life. And that first 10 pounds you lose doesn't really change your life as much as you think it does. And you kind of have to keep going. So that's probably one of the biggest things, is the motivation factor. It's way different between those two people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely something that I will like catch people on like a consultation call. I'll be like, all right, so, why you want to do this? Why do you want to lose 20, 25 pounds? And I oftentimes get answers like, I have risk for this long-term disease. I want to be healthy long-term, this and that. And I'm kind of like, okay, but none of that tells me why you want to do it today. Like that is something that you could deal with in a year, 2 years, 3 years, and still be fine. Why today? Why are you uncomfortable today? Because otherwise, like, I don't know if we're really going to get the ball rolling here. But that's a question that I've been sitting on that question for a very long time of like, because there's people that are 500 pounds that like flip a switch and they're like, all right, I'm ready to change. I have to do this. I have a client who she has lost probably 115 pounds at this point.
That's
and
wild.
I've asked her a couple times. I was like, what was it for you? Like, was it like a bunch of little things that added up to, wanting to make this change? Or was it like one big moment? She was like, one big moment. And like, I was just in it for the past 3 years. I've been working on this weight loss. And then for other people, like whether they have 20 or 200 pounds to lose, like, I feel like it differs so much individual to individual. What have you noticed just with all the people that you've worked with, like the people that do make that switch and truly do commit to making a change versus saying they want it and not following through? What constitutes that readiness?
That's the $1 billion question. I think if you solve that, you're on your way to the billionaire club.
Yeah.
It's it's hard for me to really pinpoint exactly what it is that makes people fully committed or not. I think it's easier to identify the reasons people go from committed to uncommitted, right? Like, what are the things that I see in my clients that pushes them kind of off the wagon, so to speak? And it's way easier to identify those, because I think those are things that you can actually, as you see in your clients, you can directly address them.
Mhm.
And I think some of those are, one, probably the biggest thing is people's expectations of what's going to happen and what happens are often way different,
Yeah.
right? Uh, and I think if you can address those with your clients, it's very helpful. So whenever I run into situations, or whenever I used to run into situations with clients, and they'd be like, hey, I'm not really feeling motivated, or they missed their check-in for a couple weeks, it would be like, hey, what's going on? And a lot of times the conversation would be like, well, I didn't really expect X, Y, and Z. And it's like, well, why did you not expect that? A lot of times it's, well, I've never done this before, so I didn't know that I was going to be sore and I'd have to give up X, Y, and Z, or that I would be hungry, or things like that. And then you just have the conversation of, this is new to you, right? Like, there's going to be things that are unexpected. Of course, it's going to feel this way. So that's a big one, is just kind of the unexpected. Two is, life is messy, right? I'm sure that what you've seen after coaching a couple hundred people is, life happens to everybody, right? There's
Yep.
people die, people lose jobs, they have to move, their kid gets sick, there's car accidents, there's everything that's kind of in the way, right? And it's very rarely do people have 24 months of their life where like nothing bad ever happens. Like, nothing ever takes priority, and you just get 24 months of, you get to focus everything on you. And so I think helping clients understand that those things are always going to be there, and you've got to find ways to continue to do what you want to do despite those things. And it's not selfish to be like, hey, yeah, all this stuff's going on, but like, I still have to prioritize me. And the analogy I used to always give my clients is, when you're in a plane and the plane's going down, what's the instruction with your oxygen mask, right? Put yours on first and then take care of other people. And I think you have to give your clients the permission to do that when their lives get hectic, right? It's like, hey, you spending 5 to 6 hours a week in the gym to like make sure your body and your mind are okay to handle everything else, it's not selfish. It's actually the best thing you can do. So giving people that out, basically, and letting them know like, hey, this is actually the best thing for this entire situation you're in, is another one that's super helpful. I think another thing that gets people kind of off that path of staying motivated to do what they do is shame. I think a lot of clients, when they have a bad day, they don't want to tell their coach, right?
Mhm.
They want to stop checking in. They want to not go to the gym. They want to hide from what it is that they did. And I think that's totally normal, right? I mean, think about all the relationships you have in your life. Every time you do something that maybe is going to upset that person, do you like voluntarily bring it up, or do you wait till they find out and then you address it?
Yeah. I mean, usually something like the latter.
Right? Yeah. You're like, oh, shoot, my wife told me to take out the garbage and I didn't take it out. Am I going to tell her? Am I going to wait for her to like maybe notice that I didn't, and then I'll go do it? And so I think a lot of times our clients, they're humans. They feel the exact same thing, right? As they experience those same feelings. And so as a coach, how do you provide an environment to where it's okay that you missed your check-in? Like, you're human. Let's talk about it. So that's another big one. And then I think maybe this is maybe not the last one, but probably the last one that I can think of is, we're all master negotiators with ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Think about the last time you just did a workout and you were on rep 8 and you're like, well, if I only get 9, that's probably fine. I don't need to get 10. I might hurt myself on the 10th. We all think about that, right? And I think our clients do that all the time, but with what they said was their goal, right? They'll say, oh, well, I don't really need to have that goal anymore because it's not actually important, because it's gotten hard, because they don't want to do it anymore. And so I think we are master negotiators with what we've said we're going to do and what we're going to do. And so I think those are kind of the main reasons people end up not actually staying committed to what they initially intended to do.
Yeah. And that last one, the last one just makes me kind of sad, because it's like we're always talking ourselves out of the things that we really want. When in
Yep.
reality, if we just kept going, we would all have what we want.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that is the battle we all face every day, right? Is we're always in a constant internal monologue of negotiating why we don't want to do the thing we said we were going to do this morning. Like, I just think about on a daily basis how many times I set my alarm at 4 o'clock to go to the gym, and I hit snooze and I go, oh, it's okay, I can go at 8 o'clock tonight instead.
Yeah. Okay, tell me the blind spots in this. So would it be fair to say that basically the difference between the people who have everything that they want in their life and the people who have nothing that they want in their life, is their ability to not make concessions in negotiations with themselves, and the fortitude that it takes to do that consistently over and over and over again?
I think that is probably the biggest piece of like a 3-piece puzzle, right? I think one is luck, right? And there's always luck in life, right? Why did Tom from MySpace end up with one company and Mark Zuckerberg end up with the $100 billion company, even though they're the exact same product, right? There's a little bit of luck involved. So I would say luck, your decisions that you make, and then, you know, how much leverage do you have with the decisions you make, right? And I think that's a big piece of it, right? You can work really hard and make no concessions in your business, and you can still end up with $100,000 a year business if you decide like, hey, the model I'm going to go with is I'm going to do nutrition coaching for $20 a month for people, right? It's like, that can only get you to so many dollars a year, right? But if you're like, hey, I'm going to charge 10 grand a client, it's like, you can make a ton more money. It's a harder process. It requires a lot more work, et cetera. But that's kind of the leverage, right? And so in your life, I mean, you can make the decision to be a social worker, be a neuroscientist, like a neurosurgeon, right? You can put the same amount of work and you're going to get different outputs based on the path you choose. So I'd say those are really the 3 big pieces. You obviously can't control luck, right? The path you choose and the leverage you choose is not a lot of effort to make that decision. It's the other piece that you have to make that every single day, and that's the hard part.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, because I figured that there was probably a little bit of a blind spot there. So I appreciate you rounding that out. And I was just kind of thinking about it in the context of like what separates the people that have, 200 pounds to lose versus the people who like are doing a cut for 5 pounds for doing a photo shoot, right?
Yeah.
And like, because the argument from like if I played the opposite side, like the argument is like when it comes to specifically obesity, there are so many different factors that contribute to it: socioeconomic, environmental, genetic, and behavioral. And I think a lot of times, like, for example, I did this reel about Ozempic the other day, and I was kind of just like talking, about how Noom and Weight Watchers, they're partnering with it, and like this is creating the problem with the system. Got some comments on it. People were arguing, and somebody did make a really good point that like, okay, if I've been extremely overweight my entire life, people just point the finger and say, you just need to move more and eat less, and you'll be fine. Stop complaining so much. And so it's like just looking at the fuller picture when we think about, okay, what really separates those people, and how much grace should they be giving themselves, but at the same time, how much should they be pushing themselves to get out of that situation if that's what they want? So it's like just kind of looking at it from the fuller picture, I guess.
Yeah. And that is one of the hardest questions to answer. But I think one of the things that I've found helpful is adopt a framework that's useful, right? There's a lot of things about the world that may not be true, but the way you think about it allows you to get to where you want to go, right? And a lot of things can be true, but kind of the way in which you look at the problem really helps, right? So let's say, I mean, we know obesity is a multifactorial issue, right? We know there's socioeconomic contributors. We know there's some kind of polygenic contributors. We know that there's environmental. We know that there's, like familial things. We know that there's a lot of things that, like, you may be born into an environment where you have all of the things that are against you that really kind of drive you to being obese, makes it really difficult to control food choices, etc. Now, when you're in that position, you can kind of adopt two frames of looking at it, right? All these things are against me. I can't do anything about it. Or most of these things are actually, at the end of the day, controllable, right? And which one actually helps you move the needle in your own life? And so while there may be truth to one or the other, it's a little bit of, can you adopt a kind of frame of thinking that at least helps you make the decisions of going towards where you're trying to go to? And I think that's usually really helpful for clients, right? Is I've had this conversation with a lot of clients. They're like, hey, like, I've been obese my whole life. I'm on X, Y, and Z. Like, recently we had a client who, was asking about taking Ozempic and, if there was any stigma against it. And they kind of asked this in our public group. And my response was, use the tools that you have at your disposal to get to where you want to go, right? And if it's a tool that's helpful and you can control it, why not use it? But don't let it detract you from acknowledging the way that you need to think about the problem, right? If you've been dealing with this your whole life, can you use this tool as a catalyst to start building the habits of decision making that you need to make, right? If you've got a tool that helps you manage hunger, this is great, but can you leverage that into, can I now do a better job of understanding what hunger actually means, right? So we kind of had the conversation of, if you've had trouble controlling your eating because of whatever you've dealt with your whole life, and now you have a medication that just kind of masks your mindset around how you're solving the problem, do you think that's something you could do without it eventually? And so that was kind of the conversation of, like, what is the frame of thinking in which you're tackling this problem in your life?
Yeah. I guess I'm only going to do this because I want to just see if I can poke a hole in it or play devil's advocate. But what would you say to the person that says, well, Brad, you make lots of money and you have a great life. It's not quite that simple. Like, this is the only option that I foresee in my future. I can't just start to think of it differently. It's not that simple. What do you say? What advice would you give to that person? How would you begin to change the perspective?
What is my relation to the person asking that question?
Yeah, you can say whatever you want to them. You're very close with them.
I would say there's kind of two ways you can handle that conversation. I think one is okay, what does that do for you? Right? Do you want me to say, okay, I'm really sorry that that's the position you're in and you're just going to continue to be in that position and it's really tough and I'm really sorry, right? And I'll do everything I can to help you and try to make your life better. Great. The other side of it, the other way to handle that conversation is, hey, I get that that's where you're at. What can you control and what decisions can you make to at least try to move in the right direction? And so I think those are the two ways you can approach that conversation, right? I was listening to a conversation the other day and somebody said something and it was a little bit like, when you first hear it, you're like, man, that's really rough. I don't think I'd ever want anybody to say that to me in that way. But they said, if you're ever dealing with somebody who's like in a really tough spot, they actually don't necessarily want you to just be like, oh, I'm really sorry for you, right? They want you to try to help them out of the situation that they're in. And sometimes that looks like telling them the things and giving them the tools that they need to get out of that current situation, right? So if we kind of take this out of the healthcare realm and we were to take this into, like, let's just say your career and your professional life, right? Because I think a lot of people have much less emotion attached to that. So let's say you're in a dead end job, you hate it. You're making $7 an hour. You see no way out. You have no skills, and you're showing up late to work every day because you're really not motivated. And you live in a really poor part of town, and you've had no help growing up. And they're a family member of yours, and they see you, and you're at Thanksgiving, and you drive up in a brand new car, and they're like, "Oh, it must be nice. Here's the situation I'm in." Right? The conversation with them looks like, "Hey, you're in a spot that's not great, but if other people have gotten out of this situation, you can do it too. You just got to shift the way you think about it. Like, sure, your dead end job isn't great right now, but if you actually show up and you put in the work and you put in overtime and you save a bunch of money, you can actually move into a better spot of town, right? Within 6 months, you can have enough money saved up to move to a new apartment. You can actually do the work to go get there." And so I think that's when you can kind of just tell people that they're capable of changing it. You can kind of put that conversation in the light of like, this is actually an empowering conversation and not a, "Hey, you're going to be here the rest of your life" conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I've been like kind of simmering with some versions of this a lot, because it's like we get into this industry because we want to help people,
Yeah.
but at the same time, like you can't force people to accept help either. So you can say the hard thing and they're going to receive it how they receive it. So I think it's like also letting go of control on our end of like, okay, I want to, every single person that I touch, I want their life to be better than when we first met to when I leave that relationship. But at the end of the day, like just letting go of control of other people as well. Because I'm like poking holes and I'm like, how do you get people to change? How do you get people to change? But I understand the fact that like, it is also something that has to come from within too.
Yep.
So
And
this,
go
oh,
ahead.
sorry. I was going to say this was something. So Marissa and I are in the same mentorship. So we have the same business coaches, and we get on and we talk. And a lot of times we talk about client issues, right? Because everyone within the mentorship, we want our clients to be successful, exactly like Marissa was saying. And one of our mentors said something super powerful to me that, again, not that we don't want our clients to be successful, but they're like, sometimes they need to come to you and be unsuccessful and have that be as part of their journey and be part of their story. And I thought that was super powerful, because it's like, it's like if they go to all these people and all of them are saying the same things, "Hey, you need to change your mindset. Hey, you need to change your behavior." And then whenever maybe they get to the third or fourth person, it finally clicks. So maybe they weren't successful with you, but you were part of that larger stepping stone of them eventually finding success. So that gave me a lot of peace, because yeah, it's really frustrating if you have a client who leaves or is like, "I want a refund," and you're like, we didn't get to help them. But just knowing like, okay, long term, I probably did help them, just not in the way I would have liked.
I think that's a great point. I think a great analogy to that is like, I think about all the like personal relationships I've had, like girlfriends and whatever. And, I'm married now, but a lot of it is, it's not just who you are in a relationship with, it's also who you are in that relationship and what time in your life it is. Right. And I think the same thing applies with clients and coaching. Is I've had clients who, have signed up with me, worked with me for 6 months. They never really fully engaged. It wasn't a great like experience for either of us because they were just really not committed. It was just kind of doing everything, was pulling teeth. 2 years later, they signed back up and it was like I was working with a different person, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there is a lot of power to that and a lot of truth to that. I think as you both are kind of working in this career, is you're going to experience that, right? Probably at any given time, 5 to 10% of your clients are just going to be completely disengaged because life's messy, right? And they're going to prioritize whatever they're currently doing in their own life over whatever they're doing with you. And that's not always a reflection on you either, right? That's life. I mean,
Yeah.
I think about my own life at times, and it's like, there's probably 10% of the relationships in my life I check out of at a given time because I just can't deal with it, right? Think about the same thing with like coaching.
Yeah. Yeah. Putting myself in those shoes is definitely a perspective shift on that, because it's like, yeah, there's definitely some give and take there. And it's just thinking, okay, like that might be me or you, Christina, in someone's life at a given time. And then you know, a lot of times it's like in the day-to-day of things, just like general life in general, it's like day-to-day, every little problem feels like the house is on fire. And it's like,
Yep.
oh my God, this person hates me and it means the worst thing about me ever. But really, it's not that serious. And that's probably not what they think.
Yeah.
And so it's like always being able to pull yourself back to earth with that too.
Yeah. But I think there's some level of benefit to that kind of neuroticism, right? Is like, if you're always looking at those situations, you can always find something that is like, hey, next time I run into this, I'm going to do this differently, right? It may be a situation where you did everything maybe the best that you could, and it was just the client wasn't ready to connect. But if you kind of view it in that way, there's sometimes you're like, oh, I'm going to pull out another nugget of what I learned from this relationship with this client.
Right. Always looking to just improve like 1% with every single interaction and take something from it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is awesome because I was like, well, I definitely have some questions about specifically what it's like to work with clients that have more weight to lose, because it's just something that I, like, percentage wise, have not been able to really touch quite yet in my career. But I love how it's kind of just evolved into this conversation about like, how do you get people out of their own way? How do you get rid of, how do you help people get away from learned helplessness in a sense, and just really make a better situation out of their life? So I guess in terms of like anything that we've covered so far, when it comes to just working with those clients who do have more to lose, and just like nuances we should be looking for either as coaches or the people that are going through the journey themselves, what are some other blind spots that we might be having?
Trying to think of what we've covered and maybe what we haven't.
Maybe if I kind of point you in a direction, like I've kind of separated it in my mind to like, there's the physiological blind spots or nuances.
Yeah.
There's the psychological nuances. And then there's like the environmental, and that sort of thing. So maybe if that helps.
Yeah. I mean, I think the difficulty of training people who are 300 pounds, 400 pounds, 500 pounds is, I think when we think about training somebody, we think about like, how do we load a client who weighs 150 pounds, right? Like if we were to tell a 150-pound client to do body weight lunges, that workload is so different than somebody who weighs 500 pounds, right? I mean, they're basically doing you tell them to do a Bulgarian split squat, and it's a 225-pound Bulgarian split squat for them, right? Relative to their like skeletal muscle and their bone tissue and their connective tissue. So I think a lot of times just understanding how to load those clients with both resistance training, cardiovascular training, walking, it looks much, much, much different for those clients.
Yeah. So really just checking ourselves as coaches, as trainers, of like really getting perspective on, okay, like I need to make sure that I'm putting myself in their shoes before I'm just saying like, hey, go do the same thing that everyone else is doing. Am I getting that right?
Yeah. I think one of the other things that goes very much underappreciated is, especially if you take somebody who has that much weight to lose, the likelihood that they have type 2 diabetes is pretty high, right? And the likelihood that they are what we'll call metabolically inflexible is pretty high. And so their actual like metabolism of how they use their energy systems is way different than somebody who's not, right? So what their body is using for, basically facilitating very low level activity is actually much different than somebody who is already lean, right? So if you take somebody who's a lean 150, 200-pound person, and you put them on a 40%, VO2 max on a bike, their body's burning mostly fatty acids, right? So they have a long metabolic capacity to do that. If you take somebody who is, overweight, has type 2 diabetes, and you put them on the same 40% VO2 max, their body's burning 80, 90% carbohydrates, right? So lactic acid buildup, fatigue, recovery in between sprints, it's all very different. And so I think a lot of times we don't think about that when we're programming for those people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something that I was kind of curious about because I actually worked in a exercise science lab doing VO2 max testing for a little while. So I was like, okay, I can follow this. And yeah, I guess like at what point does that, you were mentioning at the very, very beginning when, you're working with clients, maybe they're halfway through, they've lost 100 pounds of their 200 or 50 pounds of their 100. And we're starting to have these conversations of this is where it starts to get hard. This is where things kind of are going to be, the expectation that losing weight is hard meets reality here. When it comes to the physiology of it, like at what point do we, like, is it specifically like a relativity to their total body weight that they've lost? Is it a certain like body fat percentage that we start to see those things shift back into normal ranges, or like, and is there kind of like it gets harder before it gets easier type of situation there? Or like, what's that kind of like grind phase look like?
Well, we start to see a lot of kind of physiology starts to revert more towards normal at about, let's call it 15 to 20% of weight loss. At about 10%, you start to see a lot of the like disease risk markers drop, but about 15 to 20%, you start to see a lot of the other things start to kind of come around, so to speak. In terms of the actual like just weight loss number on the scale, at about that, let's call it 10 to 15% is where things start to slow down quite a bit. Right? You go from losing, I mean, it's not uncommon to see people lose 3, 4, 5, 6 pounds a week, especially initially, right? Because it represents 1% of their body weight. Like that in a week is not uncommon to see. And so then you get to, let's just take somebody who's 400 pounds and they've lost 50, 60 pounds and they're at, 340. Their weight loss is now going to be probably 1.5 pounds, maybe a week. Yeah. And then that's when you start to see, as you guys have probably seen with your clients, the water weight fluctuations start to really be noticeable, right?
Yeah.
They may be losing 1.5 pounds of body fat a week, but their body mass is so big that the water swings can be 4 or 5 pounds in a week. So they don't even see weight loss for 4 to 6 weeks and they get really frustrated, even though they've actually probably lost 4 to 5 pounds. They've got big water swings. They're weighing themselves and they're like, I haven't lost weight in a month. And you're like, you have, you just can't see it yet. And so that kind of mentally, whereas that starts to become a challenge.
Yeah. I can see how that's kind of an in-between zone where it's like overall body mass is high enough to where those swings can be pretty significant, but then they're like not at a point yet where like psychologically they've trained themselves to like really push through those long lulls without seeing any progress or like seeing any progress. So that makes a lot of sense. And I guess like I said, I haven't worked with a lot of people in that position, but it does actually make me think of that one client that I mentioned. Sometimes like her weight will just jump up like 5 pounds in a week and she's still just like right under the 200. So she doesn't have like a ton of overall body mass, but it's still enough for like a 5'4" female where it's like, okay, like this is a water weight fluctuation and it's going to come back down. And trusting that and not self-sabotaging through that is like, I think we just cracked it. Like we just cracked it like a couple weeks ago, where we really, really hit a stride and were able to stay consistent through a lot of those things. But it was like the mental battle of that was like the biggest back and forth. We were just constantly talking through every little thing that we could to get her through that plateau.
Yeah. It's the analogy I used to use with my clients is it's sort of like your retirement portfolio. It's like either look at it every single day so you just get numb to the fluctuations, and if you lose 10 grand in a day in your portfolio, you just like don't care, or don't look at it until you're ready to retire and just hope it's where you want it to be, because otherwise if it's in between and you don't really understand it, it's going to drive you crazy.
Yeah,
that's a good analogy. Christina, do you have any other questions before I have a fun one that I want to ask, but
no, I don't have any questions, but I'm just like churning and like thinking about, specific clients and those like plateaus. And I think it's hard, especially for someone who has been, I'm sorry, you're going to hear toys and cars clanking in the background. But of course, as soon as I start talking, but I think it's really difficult, especially for someone who has a lot of weight to lose because of the time variable that's involved, where how much time they need to be consistent in doing these things. And so it's like when they get to a sticking point, it's like, okay, so now I have to do what I've been doing, but I have to do it harder. Like I have to do it more. I have to be more consistent. I have to add more things. And I think that sometimes that's like the frustrating part, because they're like, I have been consistent. Like, why is this not easier for me? Like, why do I have to do this? And then that frustration of, oh my gosh, do I have to do this forever, where I'm going to be, walking, I'm going to be eating these meals and being super strict with my macros. And so I'm thinking about those clients and the conversations we've had. It's like, well, like you were saying, Marissa, it's like, sometimes we really have to work through a sticking point. And I feel like everyone's got those. We've talked about this so much on the podcast, like our little, plateaus. But I feel like it's like, once you push past those things, it's almost like, I don't know if it's a mental thing, like, okay, I did it, right? I reached my goal, we did it. And it almost gives them a little bit more momentum. But then trying to talk a client through that, I feel like can be really difficult, because it's like, sometimes their long-term goals feel so daunting. And it's like, yes, I have these little mini goals, but I feel like I'm never going to reach my long-term goal. So that's what I've just been like processing and thinking about as you guys have been talking.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know if I have a question that stems from that.
Yeah. But it's like the amount of just dialogue that has to happen to really get through that is huge, because I feel like with the one in particular, she, it was just that. It was like, we hit this sticking point. We were comfortable looping around like 190 to 200, 190 to 200. And I was like, this is a pattern. And like, in order to get through it, you're going to have to do more. Like, you're just going to have to pay closer attention and do more work. Are you ready for that? And like, can you accept that to move forward? Because I think this is your body telling you like, hey, I'm comfortable here. Like, we can keep doing what we're doing at this level, but I'm not going any further till you level it up. And then once we did that, it was like, boom, this past week, her brand new low, like, we're just rocking and rolling. But it was like the acceptance of like, I've been working really hard to get 115 pounds off. And now you're asking me to do more. And really accepting that. I think a big part of it, the thing you mentioned, identity, and accepting what your life has to look like in order to keep that off, is just such an underrated conversation that needs to be had over and over and over again. Of, it's probably not what you thought, but in order to maintain 150-pound weight loss, you are probably going to have your life look massively different than the way that it looked when you started, and probably maybe more rigid to maintain than you thought you had to, when you were kind of going through the journey of like, oh, maybe this is what maintenance will be like, or maybe this is what maintenance will be like. But like, if you want to get all the way down there and maintain it, I feel like at least for a while, there's going to have to be kind of a settling of like, no, we are continuing to stay this regimented and consistent in order to stay here. Is that about right? Or what have you seen in terms of the post weight loss period?
Yeah. So I think I'll answer that question here in a second pretty directly, but one of the conversations directly related to this that I have found really helpful with my clients is when they get to that point, I ask them, hey, when you started this journey, was your goal is to get to where you wanted to be and then just go back to your old life? Or was the goal of, you're actually just trying to build a new life, right? And the answer is almost always, well, I wanted to build a new life. And then the next sentence in that conversation is, you've built it. Like, you have built this new life and it's now yours. And now you just get to take it and run with it, right? If you wanted to go back to I don't get off the couch, I eat 2 boxes of pizza, like I can't get up and down the stairs, I'm out of breath, I'm going to be dead at 65. Like, that was the old life. The new life is, you can do whatever you want in your life. Like, you're highly capable. You can do more work. Here's the life you just built. Go run with it. So I think that's one of the really big helpful conversations when they get to that point, is like, just making sure they understand they never actually wanted the old life again. They just are now kind of coming to grips with that. So to answer your other question is, one of the things we know from the research on, people who have lost a lot of weight, kind of the post-obese life, those people have a much different requirement to maintain that than people who were never of that weight to begin with. And so we know, if you actually look at the research of what we can see so far, is it's almost entirely related to levels of physical activity and not so much food behaviors. So while there is some level of recidivism amongst kind of super weight loss clients, like their diet at their peak is never their lifelong diet, right? We know that's the case, but it never really goes back to as bad as it was before. But what is really interesting is they have to maintain a slightly higher level of physical activity than other people. Now that doesn't mean they have to be in the gym way more. It's just they have to move and walk and do a lot of the like NEAT way more than other people do.
Yeah, that's interesting. I listened to your set point theory podcast, so I was kind of listening to you debunk that. But why do you think that is? Is there like a physiological drive to go back partially to where they were, or?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few things. A lot of this is speculation because we don't have a lot of great data on it.
Yeah.
One of them is, I think once you've reached a level of kind of, if your body is at 300-400 pounds, I think when you've lost that much weight, is your overall metabolic rate, that's your kind of your basal metabolic rate, your thermic effect of food, those things are all lower than they would have been normally, right? So you have to do a little bit of compensation for that. The other piece is, and this is entirely just my speculation, is if you spent a decade moving around at 400 pounds, right? Now, when you're moving around at 150 pounds, your body's much more efficient at moving that 150 than it was at that 400. So you're actually probably burning less calories moving the same amount of distance at a lower weight than somebody else is, because your body has now adapted to it. That's my idea, but I don't know if there's any evidence to support that.
I think that makes a ton of sense. It's kind of like, I forget who it was. Maybe it was someone on the 3DMJ team, but they were talking about how during their contest prep, they like, as they lost weight, would wear a weighted vest and like add that weight back on for their cardio or whatever. And that it was fairly effective. So I feel like it kind of like rings a bell with that. It's like your body got used to moving that load all the time. And that's a lot of work. And I think that makes a ton of sense. I'd be really shocked if that didn't hold up.
There's some really weird research in mice that they did where they actually, like, this is really gross, but they like sewed weights into the mouse and their body actually like dropped the rest of their body tissue. So like their fat mass went down to compensate. So their like gravitational pull, so like their weight was the same. So when they remove the weights, their body's like perfectly compensated, which is very strange, but
interesting. I'll have to check that one out. I feel like that's where people took set point theory and ran. But but I do have a fun question for you. And that's just, I'm curious, what is either maybe a skill or a mindset that you're currently working on for yourself right now?
I'd say there's a couple of them. One is enjoying where I'm at in my life. Basically, from the age of probably 20 to 35, it's been 80, 100-hour work weeks and like always trying to get to the next thing. And I don't know what it was about being turning 35, but it's like now I feel old, which is really sad to say. But like, and the reason this happened was I was at Gonzaga with the basketball guys and we were playing a game of pickup. And I just looked at one of them and I was like, I thought I felt like I was the same age as them. And I was like, I could be your dad. Like, that's how old I am. And so I started to realize like, I don't have that many more years of like the peak of what I can do physically and mentally in my career and things like that. So just really trying to enjoy where I am in my life. So that's and that's probably been the hardest of anything I've done, is just like, how do I enjoy where I'm at? So that's been very difficult. Skill wise, that is a great question. I wish I could say I had some really cool, interesting, fun hobbies, but not really. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of, I do play quite a bit of basketball. Take the dogs for a lot of walks and hikes, but that's those are my hobbies at this point in my life. Maybe I'll take up fishing, but I think I'm too young. I think I'm too young to become the old guy sitting on my dock fishing.
Well, I'll give you some credit and say that I think that learning to find peace within your life and happiness within your life and be more present is a skill.
Well, let's hope I make some progress on it this year then.
Awesome. Well, Christina, do you have any other final thoughts to add as well?
No, this has been great. This has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome.
So you have kept my interest the whole time, Brad.
Except for when you left in the middle of it. What was that?
Awesome. Well, Brad, I mean, what do you got going on right now and where can people find you?
Just find us. We do online nutrition and fitness coaching, which probably directly competes with you. So if you want to bleep
That's
this
fine.
out of your podcast, that's great. You can do that. We're at macrosinc.net. You can find me. You can Google me. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram. We do have a podcast called My Take, and those are probably the places you can find me.
Awesome.
And
yeah,
if anybody has questions, feel free to shoot me a DM or email me. It's brad.dieter@macrosinc.net. I reply to basically everybody who messages me anything. I've been very fortunate to be helped by a lot of people in my career. So I'm always happy to just chat if anybody ever needs anything. So feel free to reach out.
yeah, and that's how I got you on the podcast. I just sent you a DM.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast, and you can find me at Marissa Roy Fitness and Christina at Christy Lynn Fit. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you back next Tuesday.